Hey Brendan, delighted to
Hi.
see you today.
How's it going?
Not too bad, thanks for joining. So to introduce Brendan Wald, you were the Director of Enterprise Services for Support. Is that the best way of putting it?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
it.
And then Slight Leader for Global Support. And you and I used to work together at LinkedIn, which is how we know each other for a long time now, Brendan.
I
And
know.
the beauty of it all is we've evolved as friends. But the reason for the conversation today is you yourself were put at risk of redundancy probably about a year and a half ago. And what was so interesting about your story is you were the site leader for the whole of enterprise support. So you were trying to hold all of that. You were trying to hold space for all the leaders and the managers who were dealing with a lot of redundancy type conversations, whilst you yourself are at risk of redundancy. So that was a lot to hold. So I thought, who better to talk about how to manage through what can be a very difficult situation than yourself? I know when I was put at risk of redundancy, it was a very different situation. I compared to you guys because for you there was collective, there was an amount of people all put at risk at the same
Yeah.
time. So really and truly, we're talking to people who might find themselves in an at-risk situation currently, or they might just have come out the other side. They've been laid off, or they have been redundant in recent times. And I think what we really want to do with this conversation is to help people manage through what can be a really, really tough time. I know for you, and correct me if I'm wrong, you kind of saw it coming, and as a leader, you would have been involved maybe in more conversations than most. But
Yeah.
maybe you talk to, what was your initial response, and how did you manage through, the change curve, if you know the change curve? Maybe
Yeah.
we'll just start there. What was your reaction, and how did you help yourself through it?
Yeah. So to your point, Neve, absolutely. I was kind of predicting this may happen for some time. So in one way, I was beginning to get my head around it in advance of the
Okay.
notification and beginning that planning element of it. But when the day came, and I suppose this is really good for anyone who might find himself in the same situation, as much as you might be predicting because you're part of some conversations or you just see things coming, it still packs a punch.
Right, of
Um,
course.
and I probably wasn't prepared for that. It's a bit final, and it's suddenly like,
Mm.
oh, this is happening. So
Mm.
that was a little bit surprising when I got on the call, and it became suddenly a reality. Um, and I think my call was dealt with dignity and respect, and I was, given a heads up
Beautiful.
before the larger population.
Do you mind
So
if I interrupt you for 1 second? So
sure.
I think that's incredible to be able to say that, and well done to the person who's having it because a lot of people don't get that. So when you say with dignity, etc., what did that look like for you? How did they show up?
Yeah, I think it was very personable. It was my own manager and my HR business partner. It was dealt with when I say in the terms of a conversation, I was told before the general population, so I had time to get my head around it before I had
Okay.
to face my leadership, my own leadership team, and guide them through the
Okay.
process. It was dealt with in a personable way, sticking within the law, of
Yes.
course, so
It's a
that
fine balance, isn't it? Yeah.
exactly, but there was that personal element to it as well. So walking away from that conversation as good as you can feel about that type of conversation, I think
Right.
that's important. And if I was doing it, I probably would have handled it the same way. And a leader at LinkedIn, Pat Waters, but I always remember her saying, treat people beautifully. And I think they did it as beautifully as they could.
That's amazing. So I think, as I say, you've been one of the really lucky ones to be able to say that because we've heard some horror stories on the other side. I think the thing that resonates most with people is that it's a human sitting in front of you. Treat me as a human. It's still a
Yeah.
difficult conversation, but I've heard leaders, very, very senior leaders, show up as robots and they'll just read
Yeah.
from the sheet and they're doing what HR told them to do, etc. There's all of the boundaries that have to be, you know, adhere to the legalities, the process,
Yeah.
etc. You can still treat the person as a human in front of you. And I think that would be one of my biggest messages to leaders or managers listening is you can do all the things that's expected of you from a business perspective, but still show compassion and empathy to the person sitting in front of you. You can never go wrong by doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And was certain things, just small, simple things that were just very personal. Like about a couple of hours later, a WhatsApp from Millie, just how are you doing?
Okay.
Small and wasn't opening any risk to the company, but just asking how was I doing as a human. So that caring element. So as I mentioned, just these small touches can make a big difference.
Totally. And how simple is that? And I think you'll always remember your conversation, won't you?
Yeah,
I know for myself, speaking to you, speaking to a number of clients who have been put at risk in the past or been through a redundancy process, you will remember that conversation and you will remember how you've been treated. So
yeah,
it's really important to show up as a human, as a person, on the person doing the conversation, but also the person on the receiving end as well. So
absolutely.
just talk me through then very quickly. So you had a bit of lead-in time, you were treated well, which is great, but it still knocked the punch. So how did you manage kind of to get through that change curve? And for anybody who doesn't understand the change curve, it's your initial response. So that could be shock, anger, frustration, upset, and you're perfectly entitled to feel all of that. In fact, it would be weird if you didn't. And but then all of the pendulum that goes as far as acceptance. And in
Yeah,
the pendulum, it can swing back and forth depending on the time of day and who you're talking to. But it can take people different times to get through that change curve. So how did
yeah.
you manage to get yourself to acceptance and to move on, so to speak?
Yeah, mine was it's probably slightly different, but everyone's is different, compared on your personal circumstances. But as part of that conversation, my first question was, is it just me within my org or is others? And I suppose a little bit of a lighthearted moment, Neve, and you know me as well. The minute that they said actually people in my org and my front line have been impacted, I went straight into, oh my God, we need to plan for them. And my
Right.
HRBP and my manager had to be like, Brendan, stop. This is about you. We can concentrate on that later, but we're delivering a message to you. But I went into autopilot and I was very much focused on how do I bring my managers, because some of them were impacted. So how do I manage that compassionately, but also at the same time get them into mode of we've potentially up to 200 people at risk now. That
Oh,
wasn't the
wow.
volume that were going to be
That's
impacted. So I had to be very compassionate, plan that compassion for my leadership team, but also get them into a mode of now they have to be compassionate and bring their frontline staff through this process. And so I became consumed, I suppose, by that. And it's only on, I guess, looking back, what I think I was potentially doing subconsciously was A, as a leader, that's where I needed to be, and that's where I needed to
okay.
focus. But I think there was an element of I'm not in control of what's just happened to me, but I can control what's happening in
Oh,
my org. So this is what I could control. And that's
okay.
where my action and my focus went to. And pretty much for the entire month plus of consultation and being at risk and then being finalized, all my focus was on handling this as beautifully as I could for my organization. And it was only at the end, I think it's on day one when you don't have any emails, nobody's pinging you, nobody needs you anymore. It's like, oh,
It's a
this has
hard
happened.
day. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a
So I
hard
think
day.
that's when the real kind of process, or not the shock. A shock is probably a bit of a strong word, but a bit of a realization of, oh, actually, this has happened.
I hear you. I hear you. So just to kind of sum up that piece, because for some people it'll be just themselves they're worrying about and their families as opposed to having to deal
Yeah.
with others at risk, or their roles at risk. And I mean their roles at risk every time I say that.
Yes.
It's really about managing what's in your control.
Yeah,
100%,
absolutely.
isn't it? Because the decision is highly likely out of their control. It's done, it's a done deal, especially if it's a business decision. There's a strategic move, whatever it might be. But then what you have is your ability to show up, your attitude, your behavior, your thought process around it, how you manage self, how you stay well. And we're going to go
Absolutely.
through all of that on a separate session during the week as well. But then day one, the reality kicks in and you start to digest what's happened. So
Absolutely.
how did you stay motivated? Because it's a year and a half.
Yeah.
We know again you had a bit of a slightly different year and a half to most. And we've been envious of Brendan's journey over the last year and a half. But the reality is it was a natural thing to have happen. You still had to manage the fallout from it. You made
Yeah.
you took it as an opportunity, is what I would say. So maybe talk us through your journey and how you've stayed motivated the last year and a half.
Yeah, and I would say it's even been a little bit more than a year and a half because we go back to I was probably in the planning mode a year beforehand of like what
Oh,
if this
wow.
happens.
Okay.
So I was a little bit I'd some of the planning done. As I said, it still packs a punch. And I suppose, you mentioned being envious and we joked about it, but I probably would give a caveat of everyone's situation is going to be very, very different. And I'm very
100%.
mindful of that. And, in terms of my own situation, I don't have any dependents. I didn't have any, I guess, financial concerns. I was okay that way. And I think if had I had that situation, it would be a very different thought
Of course.
process.
Of course.
And my personal circumstances allowed me to think differently and to say, I want to push pause. And that was very much planned and thoughtful. And it was a bit of excitement around, I'm going to take some time off. I'm going to invest that in travel, friends, family. At the same time, and as great as that sounds, and there's the excitement of that planning, you do have to manage that devil on your shoulder, that inner voice who was a lot of concerns, even with the excitement of what I was planning around. I'm planning to be out of the workforce for 12 plus months. Am I still going to be relevant when I'm going to go back in? And
Right.
at that time in particular, the landscape and for customer support was changing with AI. And so I was going to take time off at a very pivotal moment in my industry. So it was like, is this the right time? Even though I wanted it, is it the right time? Am I still going to be relevant? Will I be hireable? Will people want to hire me at the 12 months? So I had to work hard at not saying I'm not going to listen, but kind of managing those voices in terms of, well, I am going to be still relevant. What am I going to do? How do I stay relevant but still enjoy my time off? And that kind of formed part of my planning process for the year.
Brilliant.
So I kind of reframed those negative thoughts and put them into actions and planning actions.
Brilliant. And we just had a conversation with the recruiter a little bit earlier. I'm not sure where it's going to play in
Yeah.
terms of this session, but he was saying a gap in the CV is totally acceptable these days. The key is to be able to talk to it and talk to it in a very confident way. So yes, it's happened, but to not shy away from the fact. I mean, again, for you, it's quite a positive situation that you chose to step away. It was a very conscious choice. You were in that position to do so. A lot of people aren't. I have clients who've been out of work for over a year, but they've tried for over a year to get something and just haven't. It
Yeah.
will happen for them. It will absolutely happen for them. And John has given us some great tips how to think about it. But it's to really stay on point, keep yourself upskilled, and to
Yeah,
know it's going to happen. Is that fair to say?
absolutely.
And so, John, fast forward now, you are back on the market. You are the senior leader from an enterprise support perspective. What kind of things are you thinking about from a strategy perspective, how you enter the market?
Yeah, a couple of different things. I would say I'm in my infancy of beginning to start. I'm kind of like I'll get over the holiday season, and that's when I'll put a lot of my focus. But I guess in terms of both some learnings maybe for others and some plans, I think one thing is to create plans. Don't rush into things. And I think it's very easy, even as I've just started to look, it's very easy to go onto the jobs link on LinkedIn and suddenly see jobs that are relevant to you. And that's not necessarily the right thing to do. My advice would be to plan in terms of what are your absolute, like these are musts for my next job. These are things that I really, really want. These are red line. I'm not going to go for a job if it's not there. What are the nice to haves? I'd really love if these are a part of the job, the culture, the company. And then what are hard lines in terms of if I absolutely don't want this? So I've certainly spent a lot of time, even during my career break, working on that piece. So when I'm ready, these are all relevant and I can apply it to a job or to a company that I look at. So there's that piece. The other piece that I would say that I've used is, and I'm going to use probably a funny term, but you'll know what I mean, is I've created a board of directors for myself. So a group of trusted friends, colleagues, people that I will find beneficial and I know will be honest with me. So when I say a board of directors, I also mean people who, if I'm making a CV or a resume, they're going to call me out if stuff doesn't look right and that we have that trust and that relationship that they will. So I've already kind of gathered those people around me as I've started to work on my resume, as I've started to work on my interview skills. I would say, to come back to my plan, Eve, in terms of when I was doing that planning phase, I think I'm relatively clear in what I want and what I don't want. Some others maybe not. So a bit of advice that I would give there would be potentially if you have the financial opportunities, invest in a career coach, someone that will help you with that planning phase.
I'll pay you the tenner later.
Yeah. And also on the other side of things, again, I've a really good network. I'm blessed that I have recruiters that I've worked with, and HR individuals that I've worked with. But again, maybe an interview coach who's really going to, I haven't interviewed in over 12 years. So, you don't think of
Right.
these things. So really to help you with that aspect of going back into the workplace. And then I'll probably finish up with, and I'll caveat with, and it's a bit probably fluffy, but be kind to yourself during this process. I haven't fully started it yet, but I'm expecting rejections. I'm expecting not to hear
Right.
back. I think that can be just a bit, and I've seen people post around it. It can be damaging to the ego, or it can be damaging to your confidence, but it's part of the process. And you have to be able to kind of build an element of resilience around it, as hard as it may be. So I haven't quite got there. I'm going to be going into that process. So I suppose it's practice what you preach, but I'm preparing for it as much as I possibly can.
Okay, so just to be clear then, because I think again, a lot of people really struggle with that. Either they're hearing nothing or they're
Yeah.
getting all these rejection letters, and absolutely the confidence can get knocked. The energy that they start to bring then to interviews they are getting maybe not be the right energy. But you're saying is to kind of manage that mindset around it, is to, know it's gonna happen, know, whatever CVs you put out, you'd be lucky to get a response,
Yeah.
lucky in inverted commas. And it's just to know that that's just a part of the whole process and not get caught up in it, I guess, which we know is easier said than done. So if you were to give, say, 3 tips, if we were to finish up on 3 tips about how you manage the mindset, like what are the practicalities here? Because we know it's one of the key things that's going to help people to, manage through what can be a really, really difficult situation for them.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to the be kind. As fluffy as it may sound, I think it's super important, to be kind to yourself. So it is kind of silencing that inner voice. And one way that I use to do that is flip it around, use what I can from it, and frame it in a positive. But also, if I feel it's just if I'm kind of beating myself up, the question I ask myself is, would I say that to a friend? And the answer is
Oh,
always no. You would
that's
never
my
say.
favorite one.
Yeah, it's one. So be kind to yourself. You're going through a difficult process. The other piece that we kind of haven't touched on, but I know from my own experience, and maybe sometimes people reflected onto, is your redundancy doesn't define you. Your role was made redundant, not you. And to remember, you got to where you were in your previous role because you're highly skilled. And remember all those interviews and promotions that you potentially have had in your other role. You're still super successful. You got there because you were successful. You're going to be successful. So to try and bring that with you, and it's very common for people maybe to kind of go, oh, you've been made redundant in this big sad phase.
Yeah.
Try and put that out of your head and just get focused on where you want to be. And then I think the other thing is just get manage this like a project, and have
Brilliant.
your plans, so really kind of like where do I want to go? How do I get there? Who are the people that I need to get there? What are the skills that I might be missing? What are the questions I might get asked in an interview that I might be missing? How do I bridge those gaps now in advance of the interview or in advance of approaching a company? And then the last little piece I would give, in terms of what I've done, is just keep up your presence online. Again, so LinkedIn is probably the most relevant one, but your online persona, in terms of how are you influencing others, what are you posting, how are you doing courses online, just making sure that you're relevant and that you have that kind of, I guess, presence online.
That is amazing. And that aligns so well to my conversation with the recruiter, John, a little
Yeah.
bit earlier today as well. Very, very similar. So it's brilliant that there's key themes here, and you wouldn't have had any clue what the guy said. So I'm really delighted that there's a lot of similarities there. So if we were to just finish up, Bren, was there anything else you wanted to bring to the table that maybe we didn't get to cover?
No, I think we've touched on a lot of kind of wide and varied topics. But again, I think, and I'm gonna keep doubling down on the be kind to yourself, especially if people are just going through the process and they have lots of worries and concerns, which are, I'm sure, are very valid, but you will get there, you will get to the other side of things and hopefully be in a better position. But don't beat yourself up and be kind to yourself through the process and surround yourself with people that will support you.
Boom, love it. Thank you so much, Brendan. I'm so grateful for your time and best of luck with your search. And
Thank you.
I'm sure it'll go great as well. And
Appreciate it.
take on all these tips for yourself as you go through it, as they say.
Okay, thanks, Neve.
Thank you.